The year is 2017. A 13-year-old me is at my local GameStop, just checking out new games and whatnot, when I stumble upon a metal crate filled with cheap new and used games, in which I find a game for under $10, which piques my interest. When I eventually get back home, I put it up on my PlayStation 4 and start to play it. Then once I have completed it, I do it again, and again, and again, until I think I've beaten this game about 7 times in total. This game is Homefront: The Revolution. But when I, out of my curiosity, looked at what other people thought of the game, I was surprised to see that people generally fucking hated the game. Even IGN could not give the game a 7 out of 10 this time. But first, there is some context I need to lay out, because Homefront: The Revolution was actually a reboot to a game in 2011 also called Homefront. The game was published by THQ and it was a first-person shooter where you were fighting against a North Korean invasion of America. The game contained a code-style campaign and a multiplayer that was similar to Battlefield. But the game did not score well with critics, but the sales were good enough for THQ to greenlight a sequel. But the development of the sequel would not be smooth sailing. Now, the original was developed by KO Studios, but the same year in 2011, they were shut down by THQ as they reorganized because THQ was itself kinda imploding. So instead, THQ's Montreal studio took over, but eventually THQ went bankrupt, and so Crytek acquired the rights to their franchise and decided to co-publish it with Deep Silver, as Crytek UK would further develop the game. The game was for the first time revealed at E3 2014 called Homefront: The Revolution, with a release date of 2015. But just as THQ was struggling, so was also Crytek financially, and they would sell their Homefront intellectual property to Koch Media, who were the parent company to Deep Silver. Development would then continue by the newly formed Dambuster Studios, which was just a renaming of Crytek UK. The game was in March 2015 delayed to 2016, and would eventually release in late May, and the reception was even worse than before. And there were several reasons why, with one of the biggest being the performance issues, which is probably why I myself liked it a lot more, because I played it a year after the launch issues. One of the other complaints that I fully agree with and believe to be the only bad part of the game is the story. The story, like the first game, is also set during a North Korean occupation of America, and this time in Philadelphia instead of the East Coast. Now, how did the North Koreans manage to take over the entirety of United States of America, you might ask? Well, you know how today there exists the so-called Silicon Valley in California, where many tech companies exist? In this universe, North Korea would, in the 70s, develop the Silicon River, with a notable high-tech company being Apex. The US economy went bad, and because Apex or North Korea made the best weapons, the US bought only their weapons, but they all had a secret kill switch that was activated, and thus North Korea could just march in and conquer it all without resistance. So ignoring how incredibly stupid the concept of the world is, the main problem with the story is just how boring it is in all possible ways. It might be the most nothing burger of a story in all games I have ever played, as it does nothing good but also nothing terrible. First of all, your character, Brady, immediately gets heavily involved in the story by being rescued by the Resistance main guy, Walker, and after his capture, you essentially act as the 4th head member next to Sam, Dina and Jack. And yet your character is silent. And yes, many good games do have silent characters, but it always feels weird how you multiple times get in trouble or almost killed just because you say nothing, or characters will just speak for you and tell you what you want. And it also happens multiple times. So if your own character has no character or stake in all this, what about the others? The 3 important characters are the leaders, with Dina being a more vengeful killer, Doc is the more guy who values life in opposition to Dina, and Jack is the guy in between keeping it all together, and that's about it. There is not much more to the characters than meets the surface, and all the cutscenes and story beats between them keeps constantly repeating, with something bad happening or them making a plan. Dina wants to go guns blazing and killing, Doc opposes it and talks about the value of life, and Jack compromises, and they all move on, and later do the exact same thing again and again and again. It is not terrible, but also certainly not good. The sad thing is that there are good moments where the game tries and does successfully flesh out the characters for just a moment.
So you made it back. Not many did. Ned and most of his people are gone. I look into the future, Brady, and in that uncertain darkness, I see a vast constellation of light. The good deeds, the joy, and the love that will be spread by all of us as we travel our lives. Each death in this conflict extinguishes those lights, and the future darkens for all of us. I want to just run away from it all. But then I hear someone calling in pain, and I just can't do it. I have to try to help. I'm going back to work. Try and get some rest.
but it always reverts back to the usual.
You're a hero now, kid?
The other side characters you meet are even less interesting or memorable, and I don't recall their names, nor do I give enough to Google it. Why it's frustrating how boring and uninteresting they are is because several of them will die, but their deaths will just leave me feeling nothing. Not angry, not sad, but just bored. And it also doesn't help that the ending is just sequel baiting. But despite all this, the game's story could still have been, if not great, at least more than average, if not pretty good, if it only had one thing that is missing, and that is also what another franchise prides itself on: Far Cry. If I were to guess your favorite Far Cry game, I bet it would most likely be Far Cry 3. And why is that? Well, there are many reasons to enjoy it, but the one truly aspect that makes it stand out amongst games and its own franchise is the villains. The villains, although mostly boss, is what carries the game's story and game in general, and villains carrying Far Cry games is pretty common. Now imagine playing Far Cry 3 but remove all the villains and instead you are just fighting the pirates and mercenaries, and now you basically have Homefront Revolution. In both cases you have a clear enemy that makes it evilness clear and makes the player's motivation to fight back legit, but without anyone to represent them as a person, makes the enemies just boring. Not gameplay wise, but story wise. The game does begin quite strong with you being ambushed and then interrogated by someone pretty imposing, and just as you might assume he would be a recurring, if not the main villain, he quickly gets shot. After which point the game never really has a villain. Much later in the game you kind of have the mayor to briefly act as the villain, but you quickly kill him off, and that's not even where the game ends, so his death doesn't really have the same impact it could have. Crawford, a member who betrays you, does it very late, and with how little you spend time with him before his betrayal, the betrayal makes you feel nothing because you barely know him. I really think the game's story would have been many times better if it only had a recurring main villain. Even if that villain was really boring and just standard evil, it would have been something. In the end, despite my endless problems with the story, it's just one aspect of the game, and it certainly does not take away all the other things the game does right, beginning with its gameplay. But first, I want to rewind back to 2021, when Battlefield 2042 had its grand reveal, and one of the most talked about things I saw was how you could on the fly switch between different attachments. But in all honesty, I was never that impressed by it, because 5 years earlier, Homefront The Revolution did it, but much cooler. You see this pistol? In this game you can, like any other red-blooded American, convert it to SMG on the fly, and was also being able to switch attachments on the go. This applies to all of the weapons, with an AR turned into an LMG, or even a grenade launcher. So if you are going around with your AR and see an incoming vehicle, you can simply adapt and convert it to a grenade launcher. You'd think this could and would break the game, but the amount of time it takes is just enough so if you are in combat it is risky to switch unless you're in cover. And you do really want to be in cover because all the enemies do a serious amount of damage, from the normal soldiers to the vehicles. You do also have access to different craftables like molotovs and pipe bombs. All of it matches with the urban guerrilla warfare aesthetic to create a unique and fun gameplay loop. What also helps is how good the gunplay feels, with good animations, pretty good sound effects and top tier visual feedback when firing. The guns do however behave more different than most single player games with how intense the visual recoil can be, but it's something I really like. I know I'm not really saying that much about the gameplay, but describing why something is bad, at least to me, is far easier than praising it, so I'll just say this: gunplay feels good, and the switching guns for each other mechanic is really cool and fun. But there is much more to gameplay, and that is where you will be doing it, and how it affects and benefits it. The world. The world is open world and is structured like Metro Exodus in how there are several smaller open worlds that connect to each other. All of them can be divided into two types: the yellow zones and the red zones. The yellow zones are the places where the civilians in the world reside and where the urban guerrilla gameplay comes in. Because there are civilians here, you can use it to blend in and strike from the shadows and sabotage. And there's a lot of things you can do, like destroying vehicles, propaganda speakers, saving civilians or freeing prisoners, or even assassinate officers and more. But if you do, the entire zone will go on lockdown as alarms ring out, and you will soon die because of the overwhelming and infinite source of enemies heading your way. To avoid it, you need to hide and wait out until the alarm stops and the search for you is called off. Now I know it's very simplistically implemented, but I still think it's a really cool concept, and it more or less grounds the world in gameplay, because realistically you will not be able to take on the entire military head on, and it helps to create that urban guerrilla setting is going for. The red zones are in the world areas that have been abandoned and where no one lives, so for North Koreans it's a shoot on sight area, so there's no hiding or stealthing among civilians. Thus, you're more often going to be detected or be engaged in combat, but that doesn't mean that alarms across the entire region will go off, because there is none. Instead, you have these massive airships that roam around, and if they detect you in their large scanner, then they will alert and you will need to escape. The progression of the game's story is also tied to the world, because you will in the yellow zones have the goal to storm the local police stations, and to do that you need to raise the resistance meter to 100%, and then you can call upon a revolution in the area, which then makes it possible for you to storm and take it over. The way you do that is what I described before, like destroying vehicles, freeing prisoners, etc. Fun enough, the progression is the exact same as in Far Cry 5, and speaking of, another way to create resistance in the areas, and what is also to many criticism of the game, is the outposts. Me mentioning Far Cry throughout the video was by intention, because I have throughout the years heard people dismiss this game for its broken launch, bad story, but also being a knock of Far Cry. And to be honest, I agree. And that's why I like it. I actually played this game a long time before I played another Far Cry game. I don't even think I knew what Far Cry was until I played Far Cry 5 during its launch, because I thought its outpost system looked a lot like Homefront's, which I liked. I have no idea what it is with outposts in video games, but if a game has them, there's a big chance I will buy it and 100% all the outposts. Fun fact, a main reason for me buying Ghost of Tsushima was the fact that it had Mongol outposts for you to take over, which I did. But I will admit, the way this game handles outposts is far from perfect. While there are many of them I like, most of them are gameplay wise not fun. Especially you, Hospital. Many of them do not have enemies for you to fight and just require you to activate a radio or play a boring simple minigame to deactivate things. But it would not really matter if it weren't for the fact that there are over 60 of them in the game. Which also touches on my main issue with the core gameplay and its world, which is its repetition. All games do to some degree have repetition, but this game takes the cake because of how it repeats itself. Progressing the game will, as I said, require you to get the resistance meter in the Yellowstones to full, which you do, not once, not twice, but 3 times. There are too many outposts for you to complete and still have fun. Even the core gameplay suffers from this due to the lacking enemies variation. You will constantly be fighting soldiers with ARs or shotguns. If you're lucky, you might on the occasion get to fight a heavy soldier or a car, but at least 80% of the time it's just fighting 2 enemies, which, despite me really liking the gunplay, does eventually get less and less fun. It also doesn't help that the AI is not the brightest tool in the shed. But for me, it only started once I was really close to the end, and that's after me almost capturing all of the outposts, so if you don't try 100% anything and just go along, I think the problem will not be as bad, or maybe not even noticed at all. So while the gameplay is far from perfect, I still think that the core gameplay is really solid, with a pretty good open world in my opinion. One last thing I would like to mention is the graphics and visuals, as the game looks really good. Surprisingly, one of the complaints on launch was bad graphics. Granted, I never played it on launch and the game could have been updated to look better, but I don't get it. The game always looks really good, if not great, and in the cities at night it can easily rival current AAA games, if not surpass them. Something I have never heard anyone say is how the game's art style is a bit similar to Half-Life 2, especially if you compare it to City 17, with how both factions use and integrate their technologies to kind of leech off the pre-occupation areas. I don't know, just a fun thing I noticed. But despite the game's negative reception, it would end up getting 3 story DLCs, with the first being the Aftermath. It's set quite soon after the end of the main game, and it's about you rescuing Walker. It's very short, with it being less than an hour, and structured like any other COD campaign. There's not much I have to say about it, except for one big thing, and that is regarding your own character.
Wait, just a minute. Walker saved my life, and he started all of this. Now you want me to just kill him?
He's betrayed us, become a weapon for the KPA.
Yeah, I doubt he had much choice.
He now actually has a voice, and the voice acting is surprisingly good, and it did not take long for me to get used to it and greatly appreciate it. I can't stress enough how much it improves the story, and the best way is comparing Walker saving you in the base game and you saving him in the DLC.
gotta get out. I know a place to go. Help me up.
Walker. Parrish, I found him.
Ah, it's great, Brady. Can he walk?
Wait! I knew you'd come for me! I'm not ready to die just yet! I'm getting you out! Who are you? It's me, Brady! Parrish sent me. I've come to get you out of here. Brady. It's really you?
Sure is.
Shit. I almost killed you.
Yeah.
Other than that, I don't really have much to say about it, with how short it is, and thus I find it hard to recommend buying it unless it's on a sale. But if you do, you will most likely not have a bad time with it. But the next, and by far most expensive DLC, and the one I heard great things about, is Beyond the Wall. Like the title implies, this DLC takes place outside Philadelphia, and I must say how nice it is to actually be let out of the grey city and into the surprisingly beautiful wildlife and countryside. And it made me wish that we could have gotten some of it in the base game. Story-wise, you get contacted by NATO, which is preparing to launch an invasion of America and liberate it. But to do that, they need your help. You go to a hidden Cold War nuclear silo to launch a nuke and disable the APAC system needed to make the invasion possible. But whilst doing it, it does end up getting you killed, and that's about it story-wise and the end of the timeline. We actually don't get to see much of the actual invasion itself, except for some planes flying over, so it's unclear how it goes. Gameplay-wise, it was a step above Aftermath, with it having more open and dynamic areas for you to fight in. But it did also have a really weird and really annoying puzzle that I eventually just looked up the solution. I was however surprised by how short it was, with it also being under an hour long. Overall, whilst I do think it was better than Aftermath, I was quite disappointed with how short it was, especially for that really high asking price, and thus I can't really recommend buying it unless it's also on sale, or if you really want to see the end of Brady and the story. The third and last is The Voice of Freedom, where you play as Walker and it's a prequel to the main game, ending with you in the beginning rescuing Brady. But after me being disappointed with the other two DLCs, including the one everyone recommended, I did not buy this one due to it not being highly rated, so I can't say if it's worth it or not. Just before the credits are shown, you will encounter a message from the game's director, thanking the team and the players, ending with the promise that this is just the beginning. And it's honestly so sad knowing how it went nowhere and this was merely the end, and that it's probably never gonna happen. The game, as it currently stands, still has mixed ratings on Steam, and whilst I do understand why it was disliked at launch, and to this day still has many flaws, if you made it this far, I would recommend that you give this game another chance, as it's currently on a massive sale, with it costing just around €3 until September 23rd. And lastly, thank you for watching.